The blood-red sunset cast long shadows across the dusty streets of Gold Ridge, California. When Delia Evans stumbled off the stagecoach, her face streaked with tears and a small carpetbag clutched in her trembling hands. The year was 1876, and the once respected daughter of the town's most prominent family had returned in disgrace, shunned by the very people who had once adored her. "You best move along, Miss Evans," the stagecoach driver muttered, refusing to meet her eyes as he tossed down her trunk. "Your pa made it mighty clear you ain't welcome at the family home no more." Delia straightened her back, summoning what little dignity she had left. At 22, she had experienced more heartache than most women twice her age. Just 2 months earlier, she had been engaged to Vernon Blackwell, the son of a wealthy railroad investor from San Francisco, until he revealed his true nature. "I have somewhere to go," she lied, brushing dust from her once fine traveling dress, now worn thin at the elbows. The driver merely shrugged, climbed back onto his seat, and with a crack of his whip, the stagecoach rumbled away, leaving her alone as curious onlookers peered from shop windows. She recognized faces people she'd known her entire life quickly turning away when she caught their gaze. Gold Ridge had grown in the 3 months she'd been gone. New storefronts lined Main Street, and the sounds of hammering echoed from the direction of the new railway station. The prosperity her father had predicted was finally arriving, but Delia would have no part in it. She had been cast out disowned for loving Vernon, the man her father had initially approved of but later condemned as a fraudster and swindler when his true schemes came to light. But it had been too late. Delia had already given him her heart, defending him even as evidence mounted against him. When she'd finally seen the truth, Vernon had already disappeared with her family's investment money and half the town's savings. Her father's last words still burned in her ears. "You chose that thief over your own blood. You're no daughter of mine." Delia took a deep breath and began walking toward the only place she might find refuge, her childhood friend, Mary's modest home on the edge of town. The weight of her trunk made her arms ache, but she refused to abandon her few remaining possessions. As she passed the Golden Spur Saloon, the batwing doors burst open. A man stumbled backward onto the boardwalk, followed by the angry voice of the saloon owner. "I told you last time, McAllister. Your credit's no good here. Pay your debts or stay out." The man, tall, broad-shouldered, with hair the color of sun-bleached wheat, straightened his hat and turned, nearly colliding with Delia. His steel-gray eyes met hers, and for a moment neither spoke. "Pardon me, madam," he said finally, his voice a low rumble that somehow matched the rugged lines of his face. He stepped aside, then noticed her struggling with the heavy trunk. "Allow me to help with that burden." "I can manage," Delia replied stiffly, not wanting charity from a stranger, especially one who'd just been thrown out of a saloon. A flash of amusement crossed his face. "I don't doubt it, but my mama raised me to assist ladies in distress, whether they want help or not." He reached for the trunk, his fingers brushing against hers. "The name's Ethan McAllister." "I'm not in distress," she insisted, but relented as her arms began to tremble from exhaustion. "And I'm not a lady, not anymore. I'm Delia Evans." Recognition dawned in his eyes. "The banker's daughter." Delia tensed, waiting for the judgment, the scorn. "Former daughter," she corrected bitterly. "I've been disowned." Instead of the contempt she expected, Ethan merely nodded and hefted her trunk onto his shoulder with surprising ease. "Where to, Miss Evans?" "Mary Crawford's place, past the church," she said cautiously. "But you needn't trouble yourself." "No trouble," he replied, falling into step beside her. "Seems to me this town's given you enough hardship already." As they walked in silence, Delia felt the weight of stares following them. Ethan seemed oblivious or perhaps indifferent to the whispers that trailed in their wake. "You're causing more gossip," she murmured. "Being seen with me won't do your reputation any favors." Ethan laughed, a genuine sound that momentarily lightened the heaviness in her chest. "Miss Evans, my reputation in this town couldn't possibly get any worse, so don't you worry about that." He glanced at her with those penetrating gray eyes. "Besides, I never much cared for folks who judge others without walking in their shoes." They reached Mary's small house as the last light faded from the sky. Before Delia could knock, the door flew open and Mary stood there, her round face a mixture of relief and concern. "Delia, thank heavens you're here. I was worried sick when your letter said you were coming back." Her gaze shifted to Ethan and her eyes widened slightly. "Mr. McAllister." "Madam," he acknowledged with a tip of his hat. He set the trunk down carefully on the porch, just helping Miss Evans with her belongings. Mary's expression softened slightly. "That's kind of you." Ethan turned to Delia, his expression unreadable in the gathering darkness. "Miss Evans, I wish you well." He hesitated, then added quietly, "This town has a short memory when it comes to its own sins, but a long one for others. Keep your head high." Before she could respond, he was gone, striding away into the night with the easy gait of a man accustomed to covering long distances. "Delia," Mary whispered urgently, pulling her inside. "Do you know who that is?" He said his name is Ethan McAllister. "He's a cowboy who works at the Rockingham Ranch outside town, but there's more to him than that." Mary glanced nervously at the door. "They say he killed a man in Texas. Some say self-defense, others say cold blood. He showed up here about a year ago, keeps to himself mostly." "He was kind to me," Delia said simply. "That's more than I can say for most people I've known all my life." Mary's expression softened. "Oh, Delia, I'm so sorry about everything. Your letter didn't say much, just that you were coming back and needed a place to stay." Delia sank into a chair, suddenly overwhelmed by fatigue and emotion. "There's not much to tell. Vernon wasn't who he pretended to be. He took Father's money and disappeared. Father blamed me for defending him, for loving him." Her voice broke. "He said I'm dead to him." Mary sat beside her, taking her hands. "You can stay here as long as you need. It's not much, but it's more than I deserve," Delia whispered. "I was such a fool, Mary, so blinded by pretty words and grand promises." "We've all been fooled by men with silver tongues," Mary said gently. "The difference is, most of us didn't have the whole town watching when it happened." That night, lying on Mary's spare cot, Delia stared at the ceiling and wondered how her life had unraveled so completely. Just 6 months ago, she'd been the cherished daughter of Gold Ridge's most influential citizen, with a future as bright as polished silver. Now she was destitute, disgraced, and alone. Well, not entirely alone. Mary's kindness was a balm to her wounded spirit, and strangely, the brief encounter with Ethan McAllister lingered in her thoughts. There had been no judgment in those gray eyes, only a kind of understanding that suggested he knew something about falling from grace. "Tomorrow," she whispered to herself in the darkness, "I start rebuilding." Dawn broke over Gold Ridge, painting the modest houses and businesses in shades of pink and gold. Delia rose early, determined to make herself useful to Mary, who worked as a seamstress for the town's more affluent ladies. "I can help with your sewing," Delia offered as they shared a simple breakfast of porridge. "My needlework was always praised." Mary looked uncomfortable. "Delia, I'm not sure my customers would, that is." Realization dawned painfully. "They wouldn't want their garments touched by me." The bitter truth hung between them. "I'm sorry," Mary said miserably. "People are being ridiculous, but I can't afford to lose business, not with my mother's medicine costs." Delia reached across the table and squeezed her friend's hand. I understand, truly. I'll find something else. She forced a smile. I'm not afraid of hard work. After breakfast, Delia ventured into town, her heart pounding as she approached each business to inquire about employment. The responses varied from awkward refusals to outright scorn. By midday, her spirits were sinking lower with each rejection. At the general store, old Mr. Peterson at least had the decency to look ashamed. I'm sorry, Miss Evans. Your father made it clear that anyone who helps you will lose his banking business. I can't afford that risk. The town's fear of William Evans's financial retribution was a formidable obstacle. Delia left the store, fighting tears of frustration. Her father's influence extended like a suffocating blanket over the entire town. She was so distracted by her predicament that she nearly walked into a horse tethered outside the telegraph office. Startled, she stepped back directly into someone's solid chest. "We have to stop meeting like this, Miss Evans," came Ethan McAllister's voice, his hand steadying her shoulders. Delia whirled around, flustered. "Mr. McAllister, I apologize for my clumsiness." His gray eyes studied her face, no doubt noting the strain of the morning's rejections. "No harm done." He hesitated, then asked, "How are you settling in?" "Splendidly," she lied, forcing brightness into her voice. "Everyone has been most welcoming." One eyebrow rose skeptically. "Is that so?" "Because from where I was sitting in the cafe across the street, it looked like you were being turned away from every establishment in town." Heat rushed to her cheeks. "You were watching me." "Not intentionally," he replied. "But it's hard not to notice someone being treated unjustly in broad daylight." Delia sighed, her false bravado crumbling. "I need work, Mr. McAllister, any work." "But it seems my father has made that impossible in Gold Ridge." Ethan was silent for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "The rocking M is short-handed," he said finally. "The owner's wife, Mrs. Miller, has been looking for help with the household and the ranch accounts." Hope flickered briefly before reality doused it. "I doubt Mrs. Miller would want someone with my reputation." "Sarah Miller judges people on their merits, not town gossip," Ethan said firmly. "And she's not afraid of William Evans or his banking power. The Millers own their land free and clear." Delia hesitated, weighing her desperate circumstances against the uncertainty of working at a ranch miles from town. "I've never done ranch work before. But you can keep accounts, I'd wager, being a banker's daughter, and you can learn the rest." His eyes met hers directly. "Unless you're afraid of hard work." "I'm not afraid," she replied, lifting her chin. "But why would you help me? You hardly know me." Something flickered in his eyes, something that might have been recognition of a kindred spirit. "Let's just say I know what it's like when a town turns its back on you." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded paper. "Here's a map to the Rocking M. I'll tell Mrs. Miller to expect you tomorrow morning." Before she could respond, the telegraph office door opened, and a man in a smart business suit emerged. When he spotted Delia, his face contorted with disdain. "Miss Evans," he said coldly, "I'm surprised you show your face in town after what your thief of a fiancé did to my investments." Delia felt herself shrinking under the man's harsh words, but suddenly Ethan stepped between them, his posture relaxed yet somehow unmistakably threatening. "Mr. Holloway," he said pleasantly, though there was steel beneath his tone, "I believe you have business elsewhere." The man sputtered, his face reddening. "You defending this woman, McAllister? Birds of a feather, I suppose, criminals sticking together." Ethan's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Careful now. I'd hate for folks to start asking questions about those cattle that mysteriously appeared in your herd last spring with altered brands." Holloway paled visibly. "You're making dangerous accusations." "Just making conversation," Ethan replied easily. Good day to you, sir." Holloway hurried away, throwing one last venomous glance over his shoulder. Delia stared at Ethan in astonishment. Did he really steal cattle? Ethan's expression remained neutral. Let's just say Mr. Holloway's business practices wouldn't stand up to careful scrutiny. He nodded toward the paper in her hand. "Tomorrow morning. Sarah Miller is fair but expects punctuality." "Thank you," Delia said, genuinely moved by his intervention. "I don't know why you're helping me, but I'm grateful." Something softened in his face. "Everyone deserves a second chance, Miss Evans." He tipped his hat and turned toward his horse. "Even those of us who made poor choices in who we loved." As he rode away, Delia wondered about the story behind those words. What poor choices had shaped Ethan McAllister's life? And why did she feel such a strange connection to this enigmatic cowboy with the troubled past? The following morning, Delia set out for the Rockingham Ranch at dawn, borrowing Mary's elderly mare for the journey. The map Ethan had given her was detailed, marking the trail clearly through the rolling hills east of Gold Ridge. After an hour's ride, she crested a rise and caught her first glimpse of the ranch spread out below a substantial main house. Several outbuildings, corrals, and beyond them, pastures dotted with cattle. It was larger than she'd expected, suggesting the Millers were more prosperous than most ranchers in the area. As she approached, a woman emerged from the main house, shading her eyes against the morning sun. She was perhaps 40, with streaks of gray in her dark hair, dressed practically in a simple skirt and blouse with a well-worn apron tied around her waist. "You must be Miss Evans," she called as Delia dismounted. "Ethan said you'd be coming." "Yes, madam. Thank you for considering me." Sarah Miller's keen eyes assessed her, taking in the quality of Delia's dress once fine, but now showing wear and her clearly inexperienced handling of the horse. "Ethan tells me you can keep accounts but haven't done ranch work before." "That's correct," Delia admitted. "But I'm willing to learn whatever's needed." Sarah nodded approvingly. "Honesty's a good start." She gestured toward the house. "Come inside. We'll discuss what I need and what I can offer." The ranch house was spacious and well built, with sturdy furniture and simple decorations that spoke of comfort rather than ostentation. Sarah led her to a kitchen where the delicious aroma of fresh bread filled the air. "Coffee," she offered, pouring a cup without waiting for an answer. "My husband Robert is out with the men moving cattle to the north pasture. He'll be back for dinner." Delia accepted the coffee gratefully, wrapping her cold fingers around the warm cup. "Mr. McAllister said you needed household help and someone for the accounts." Sarah sat across from her at the large wooden table. "I do. My arthritis makes some tasks difficult, and I never did have a head for numbers. Robert tries, but he's more comfortable with cattle than columns of figures." She studied Delia thoughtfully. "I know who you are, Miss Evans." Word travels fast in these parts. Delia tensed, waiting for the judgment that had become so familiar. "I don't put much stock in gossip," Sarah continued. "What matters to me is whether you're honest, hardworking, and willing to learn. The past is the past." Relief washed over Delia. "Thank you, Mrs. Miller. I promise you won't regret giving me this opportunity." Sarah's expression softened. "Everyone deserves a chance to rebuild, girl." She leaned forward. "Now, here's what I can offer: room and board plus a small wage. You'd help with the household, the garden, and keeping our accounts in order. It won't be easy, ranch life never is, but it's honest work." "I accept," Delia said immediately. "When would you like me to start? How about right now?" Sarah stood, reaching for a spare apron hanging near the stove. "The men will be hungry when they return, and I've got bread to finish and stew to prepare." For the next several hours, Delia worked alongside Sarah in the kitchen, learning the rhythms of ranch meal preparation far different from the genteel dinner parties she'd once hosted at her father's house. Her hands, once soft and pampered, reddened from hot water and knife work, but she found satisfaction in the simple, productive tasks. By late afternoon, the sound of horses and men's voices signaled the return of the ranch hands. Sarah straightened, wiping her hands on her apron. "That'll be them now. Ready to meet the crew?" Delia smoothed her hair nervously. "As ready as I'll ever be." The kitchen door opened, and a tall, weather-beaten man in his 50s entered, removing his hat. "Something smells mighty fine, Sarah." His eyes landed on Delia with surprise. "Well, who's this?" "Robert, this is Miss Delia Evans, our new help." "Delia, my husband Robert Miller." Robert Miller extended a calloused hand. "Pleased to meet you, Miss Evans. Any help for my overworked wife is welcome indeed." Before Delia could respond, the door opened again, and several dusty, tired-looking cowboys filed in, stopping short when they spotted her. Ethan was the last to enter, his tall frame filling the doorway. When their eyes met, something unspoken passed between them. "Miss Evans," he acknowledged with a slight nod. "Mr. McAllister." Sarah clapped her hands. "All right, men, get washed up. Dinner in 20 minutes." As the cowboys filed back out to clean up, Robert turned to his wife. "Is she staying in the old foreman's cabin?" "For now," Sarah confirmed. "I had the boys air it out yesterday. It's small but private." The dinner that followed was unlike anything in Delia's experience, noisy, informal, with hearty food passed around a table crowded with ranch hands of various ages. She sat quietly, observing the easy camaraderie among the men as they discussed the day's work, cattle prices, and local happenings. Ethan sat across from her, speaking little but occasionally catching her eye with an unreadable expression. She noticed the other men treated him with a mixture of respect and caution, deferring to him on matters of ranch work but maintaining a certain distance. After dinner, as the men dispersed to the bunkhouse and Sarah and Robert retired to their room, Ethan offered to show Delia to the cabin that would be her new home. "It's not what you're used to," he warned as they walked through the deepening twilight, carrying her trunk between them. "I'm not the person I used to be," she replied simply. The cabin was indeed small, just one room with a bed, a small table, a pot-bellied stove, and a few rough shelves. But it was clean, with fresh linens on the bed and a vase of wildflowers on the table that could only have been Sarah's thoughtful touch. "It's perfect," Delia said, meaning it. After weeks of uncertainty, even this humble space represented security and a fresh start. Ethan set her trunk down by the bed. "The pump is out back for water. Outhouse is behind the main barn." He hesitated, then added, "Ranch life isn't easy, Miss Evans. The days are long, the work is hard, and luxuries are few." "Are you trying to scare me away, Mr. McAllister?" she asked, a hint of challenge in her voice. The ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Just preparing you for reality." "Reality and I have become well acquainted lately," she said dryly. "I'm not afraid of hard work." He studied her for a moment as if reassessing her. "No, I don't believe you are." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Some of the men may be less than welcoming at first. Not everyone has let go of the stories about your involvement with Blackwell's schemes." "And you?" she asked quietly. "What do you believe?" His gray eyes held her steadily. "I believe people are more complicated than the worst thing they are accused of." With that cryptic statement, he touched his hat brim. "Good night, Miss Evans." "Good night, Mr. McAllister." Alone in her cabin, Delia unpacked her meager belongings, arranging them carefully in her new space. Outside, the vast night sky spread above the ranch, stars blazing with a brilliance she'd never noticed in town. For the first time since her world had collapsed, She felt something like hope stirring in her chest. The weeks that followed tested Delia's resolve in ways she couldn't have imagined. She rose before dawn each day, helping Sarah prepare breakfast for the ranch hands, then spent her mornings on household tasks, laundering, cleaning, gardening, and tasks that had once been done by servants in her father's house. Her afternoons were devoted to the ranch books, which she found in disarray, requiring hours of painstaking work to organize. Her soft hands blistered, then calloused. Her back ached from unfamiliar labor. But each night, she fell into bed with the deep satisfaction of honest exhaustion and the knowledge that she had earned her place that day. Sarah proved to be a patient teacher and, gradually, a friend. She never pried into Delia's past, but offered quiet guidance when needed and genuine appreciation for her efforts. "You're a quick learner," she remarked one morning as they worked side by side, preserving the summer's bounty of peaches. "Most city girls would have run back to town by now." "I have nothing to run back to," Delia admitted, wiping sweat from her brow. Sarah's hand stilled. "Sometimes what seems like the end of everything is actually the beginning." She glanced out the window toward where the men were working with the horses. Ethan was in a dark place when he first came here. Wouldn't talk, barely ate. Robert saw something in him worth saving. Delia followed her gaze to where Ethan was visible in the corral, working with a young, spirited horse. Even from a distance, his skill was evident in the calm, assured way he moved around the nervous animal. "What happened to him?" she asked, unable to contain her curiosity. "In his past, I mean," Sarah sighed. "That's his story to tell if he chooses. But I will say this, he knows something about loving unwisely and paying a heavy price for it." She gave Delia a meaningful look. "Perhaps that's why he spoke up for you." Her relationship with the ranch hands evolved slowly. Some, like old Pete the cook and young Jimmy who helped with the horses, accepted her readily enough. Others remained distant, particularly Hank Owens, a barrel-chested cowhand with a perpetual scowl who made no secret of his disdain. "Don't mind Hank," Pete advised her one evening as she helped in the cookhouse. "He lost his life savings to your former fiancé's investment scheme." Delia's hands trembled as she sliced bread. "I didn't know about Vernon's fraud. I believed in him too," Pete nodded sagely. "Folks don't always see that part. Easier to blame you than admit they were just as fooled." Ethan remained an enigma. He treated her with unfailing courtesy but maintained a careful distance. She would sometimes catch him watching her with an unreadable expression, only to look away when their eyes met. They rarely spoke beyond the necessary exchanges about ranch business, yet she felt a growing awareness of him, his quiet competence, the respect he commanded from most of the men, the gentleness he showed to animals. One afternoon in late August, nearly a month after her arrival, Delia was returning from the garden with a basket of vegetables when she heard raised voices from the barn. Curious, she approached cautiously. "I'm telling you, Miller, it's a mistake having her here," Hank's distinctive voice growled. "She was in on it with Blackwell. How do we know she ain't going through the account books looking for ways to rob us blind?" "That's enough, Owens," came Robert Miller's firm reply. "Miss Evans has proven herself hardworking and honest. I won't have this kind of talk on my ranch." "Why not ask the question that's really on your mind, Hank?" Ethan's voice cut in, deceptively calm but with an underlying edge. "You're not worried about the ranch money. You're bitter because you lost your savings to Blackwell and you're looking for someone to blame." "Watch yourself, McAllister," Hank snarled. "You're mighty quick to defend her. Makes a man wonder why. Maybe you're sweet on the banker's disgraced daughter. Fitting, I suppose, a killer and a thief's woman." There was a sudden scuffle, and Delia gasped as she heard the sound of a body hitting the barn wall. "I said, that's enough," Robert's voice thundered. "Ethan, let him go. Hank, you're on thin ice. One more word against Miss Evans and you can collect your pay and ride out." "Clear." Delia retreated quickly, not wanting to be caught eavesdropping. Her mind whirled with what she'd heard. Killer. Was that what people believed about Ethan? And why had he defended her so fiercely? That evening, she walked to her cabin after dinner to find Ethan waiting by her door, his expression grave. "Mr. McAllister," she acknowledged, suddenly nervous. "Is something wrong?" "I wanted to apologize for what happened in the barn today," he said directly. Heat rushed to her face. "You knew I overheard. I saw you walking away." His eyes searched hers. Hank was out of line. His grievances with Blackwell, not you. "But not entirely misplaced," she said quietly. "I did vouch for Vernon to many people in town, including my father. I believed in him completely." "That makes me responsible in a way." Ethan shook his head. "Being deceived doesn't make you culpable." "Is that true of you as well?" she asked boldly. "I've heard rumors about your past." Something shuddered in his expression. "People talk. Not all of it's true." "And what is true, Mr. McAllister?" He was silent for a long moment. "I killed a man," he finally said, his voice low. "That part's true enough, but it wasn't murder despite what some claim." "What happened?" she pressed gently. Ethan's gaze drifted toward the distant mountains, now purple in the fading light. "I loved a woman in Texas, Emily. She was married to a rancher named Wade Thornton, a mean drunk with a habit of using his fists on her." His jaw tightened at the memory. "I tried to convince her to leave him. She was afraid with good reason." Delia waited silently as he gathered himself to continue. "One night, he beat her so badly she couldn't get out of bed for a week. I confronted him in town, told him if he touched her again, he'd answer to me." Ethan's voice grew harder. 2 days later, I found her at the bottom of their staircase with a broken neck. Thornton claimed it was an accident, she'd fallen, but I knew. Everyone knew." "What did you do?" Delia whispered, though she already sensed the answer. "I called him out. Fair fight, both of us armed. He drew first, but I was faster." His eyes met hers, challenging her to judge him. "The law called it self-defense, but his family had influence. They made sure no one in that county would hire me, serve me, or sell to me. Said I'd murdered him out of jealousy for his wife." "So you left," she concluded softly. "Rode west until I found a place that didn't know my name or care about my past." He gestured toward the main house. "The Millers gave me a chance when others wouldn't. I owe them everything." Delia absorbed his story, understanding now why he might have sympathy for her situation. "We're not so different then. Both outcasts because of who we loved." Something shifted in his expression, a softening, a recognition. "The difference is, you loved a man who betrayed you. I loved a woman who couldn't be mine." He straightened, as if suddenly aware he'd revealed too much. "It's getting dark. You should go inside." "Ethan," she said, using his first name for the first time. "Thank you for telling me the truth." He nodded once, then turned and walked away, his silhouette gradually dissolving into the gathering darkness. That night, Delia lay awake long after she should have been sleeping, thinking about Ethan's story and the parallels to her own. Both of them had loved unwisely, though in vastly different ways. Both had paid dearly for those choices. But while she had been a naive girl deceived by a skilled liar, Ethan had loved honorably, if hopelessly, and had stood up for what was right despite the consequences. The revelation changed something between them. Over the following days, the careful distance Ethan had maintained began to dissolve. He sought her out more often, offering to teach her to ride properly, explaining ranch operations as she updated the account books, even occasionally joining her on the porch after dinner. as the evening cooled. September brought the cattle roundup, a frenzy of activity as the ranch prepared to drive part of the herd to market. Delia found herself working longer hours, helping Sarah prepare provisions for the men who would be on the trail and taking on additional household duties. The evening before the drive was to begin, she was returning from the chicken coop with a basket of eggs when she heard hoofbeats approaching fast. Looking up, she saw a rider racing toward the ranch house, pushing his horse hard. "Trouble," the man shouted as he reined in. It was Terry, one of the younger hands. Rustlers hit the north pasture. They're driving about 40 head toward Broken Ridge. The ranch erupted into activity. Robert bellowed orders as men ran for horses and weapons. Ethan emerged from the barn, already armed, his expression grim. "How many?" he demanded. "Looked to be 5 or 6, Terry gasped, still winded. "They've got about an hour's head start." Robert turned to Ethan. "Take 6 men. Cut them off at Devil's Canyon if you can." Ethan nodded, his eyes finding Delia across the yard. For a moment, something unspoken passed between them, concern, perhaps, or a promise to return. Then he was mounted and riding out with the men, dust billowing in their wake. The hours that followed were tense with waiting. Sarah kept coffee brewing and food ready, her face lined with worry. "Cattle rustling has gotten worse this year," she confided to Delia as they worked in the kitchen. "The railroads brought higher cattle prices, and with that comes thieves." "Will they be all right?" Delia couldn't keep the concern from her voice. Sarah's eyes were knowing. "Ethan knows what he's doing. He'll bring our boys home safe." It was well past midnight when they heard the returning riders. Delia and Sarah hurried outside with lanterns as the men dismounted, exhausted but triumphant. "Got the cattle back," Robert announced, embracing his wife. "Caught the rustlers trying to move them through the canyon." "Anyone hurt?" Sarah asked anxiously, her eyes scanning the men. "Jimmy took a bullet grazed to the arm, nothing serious," Robert replied. "And Ethan?" Delia's heart clenched as she searched the group, finally spotting Ethan dismounting slowly, one hand pressed to his side. In the lantern light, she could see the dark stain spreading across his shirt. "It's nothing," he growled when she approached. "Just a scratch." "A scratch doesn't bleed like that," she retorted, moving to support him as he swayed slightly. "Sarah, we need hot water and bandages." Together, they got Ethan into the house and seated at the kitchen table. When Sarah brought the medical supplies, Delia took charge without hesitation. "Shirt off," she ordered, rolling up her sleeves. Ethan raised an eyebrow but complied with a wince, revealing a muscled torso and a bleeding gash along his left side. "Knife," he explained tersely. "One of them got close." Delia worked methodically, cleaning the wound with a steady hand that belied her inner turmoil. "You're lucky. It's deep but clean, should heal well if infection doesn't set in." Her fingers traced the edges of the cut, assessing the damage. "You'll need stitches." "Sarah can," he began. "My arthritis, remember," Sarah interrupted. "Delia's hands are steadier. I'll just get the whiskey for medicinal purposes." She winked as she left the room, closing the door behind her with surprising finesse for a woman with arthritic hands. Alone with Ethan, Delia threaded a needle, her face composed though her heart raced. "This will hurt." "Not my first stitches," he replied, then hissed as she poured whiskey over the wound. She worked in silence, acutely aware of his bare skin under her fingers, the steady rhythm of his breathing, the occasional involuntary tensing of his muscles when the needle pierced particularly sensitive flesh. His torso bore other scars, testament to a life lived hard and sometimes dangerously. "You've done this before," he observed, watching her tie off a neat stitch. "My father insisted I learn practical medical skills. He said a banker's daughter should be accomplished in all respects." A sad smile crossed her face. I doubt he envisioned me using those skills to stitch up a wounded cowboy. His loss, Ethan said quietly. Delia's hands stilled for a moment, then resumed their work. What happened with the rustlers? We caught them in the canyon like Robert planned. There was a fight. His voice was matter of fact. We took 2 prisoners, the others got away. Sheriff Haynes is riding out tomorrow to collect them. You could have been killed, she said, unable to keep the tremor from her voice. His eyes found hers. Would that have mattered to you, Delia? The use of her given name, combined with the directness of the question, made her breath catch. Yes, she admitted softly. It would have mattered very much. Something kindled in his gray eyes, a warmth, a promise. But before he could respond, the door opened as Sarah returned with fresh bandages. "How's our patient?" she asked, her eyes twinkling with poorly concealed matchmaking delight. "Stubborn," Delia replied, breaking the moment. "But he'll live." The next day, with most of the men departed on the cattle drive, the ranch felt eerily quiet. Ethan, left behind due to his injury despite his protests, found Delia in the garden harvesting the last of the summer vegetables. "Need help," he offered, moving carefully to protect his wounded side. "You should be resting," she chided, but made room for him on the bench beside her. They worked in companionable silence for a while, their hands occasionally brushing as they sorted beans into a basket. Delia was acutely aware of his presence, the subtle scent of soap and leather, the controlled strength in his hands, the quiet intensity he brought to even this simple task. "When I first came to Gold Ridge," she said suddenly, "I was engaged to Vernon within 2 months. He was charming, sophisticated, everything a banker's daughter was supposed to want. He talked about taking me to San Francisco, to Europe." She sighed, remembering her foolishness. "I never once questioned whether it was real, the attention, the affection. I just accepted it as my due." Ethan listened silently, his hands continuing their steady work. "When my father discovered Vernon's investment scheme was fraudulent, I defended him, insisted there must be some mistake." She shook her head at the memory. "Even when the evidence was overwhelming, I couldn't accept that the man I loved was a criminal who had only wanted my family's connections. My pride wouldn't allow it." "Pride can be a dangerous thing," Ethan observed quietly. "Yes. My father gave me a choice: renounce Vernon and stay, or defend him and leave. I chose wrong." She looked down at her hands, now calloused and work-worn. "By the time I admitted the truth, Vernon had disappeared with thousands of dollars and my father had disowned me. You were young." "You believed in love," Ethan said, his voice gentle. "That's not a crime." "No, but it was a costly mistake." She met his eyes directly. "I've learned that real love isn't about grand promises or pretty words. It's about steadfastness, truth, being there when it matters." Something unspoken passed between them, an understanding, a possibility. "Delia," he began, his voice low and earnest. But whatever he intended to say was interrupted by the sound of an approaching buggy. They both looked up to see a fine carriage coming up the drive, unusual enough on the remote ranch to draw immediate attention. "Were you expecting visitors?" Ethan asked, rising to his feet with a slight wince. Delia shook her head, shading her eyes against the sun to see better. As the carriage drew closer, her blood turned to ice. "It's my father." William Evans sat ramrod straight on the buggy seat, his silver hair and impeccable suit as imposing as Delia remembered. Beside him sat Margaret Thornton, the widow who had been his constant companion since Delia's mother died 5 years earlier. Ethan's hand found her elbow, steadying her. "You don't have to see him if you don't want to." "No," she said, squaring her shoulders. "I need to face him." They walked together to the front of the house as the carriage stopped. William Evans surveyed the ranch with poorly concealed disdain before his gaze landed on his daughter. His eyes widened slightly at her transformed appearance, the simple work dress, the sun-browned skin, the confidence in her stance that hadn't been there when she left Gold Ridge. "Delia," he acknowledged stiffly as he helped Mrs. Thornton down from the carriage. "Father," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "Mrs. Thornton, this is unexpected indeed." His cold gaze shifted to Ethan, narrowing with recognition. "McAllister." Ethan nodded but said nothing, his hand still supportive at Delia's elbow. Sarah emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron. "Mr. Evans, what a surprise. Would you and your companion like to come inside?" "Thank you, Mrs. Miller," William replied with formal courtesy. "We won't be staying long. I've come to speak with my daughter on a private matter." Delia felt Ethan's protective presence beside her. "Anything you have to say to me can be said in front of my friends," she said firmly. A flicker of annoyance crossed her father's face. "Very well. I've come with news and an offer." He glanced at Mrs. Thornton, who nodded encouragingly. "Vernon Blackwell has been apprehended in San Francisco. He's being returned to stand trial for his crimes." The news hit Delia like a physical blow. Vernon, captured. The man who had deceived her, used her, and left her to face the consequences alone would finally answer for his actions. "I see," she managed. "And why tell me this in person? You made your feelings about my involvement quite clear." William shifted uncomfortably. "Margaret has convinced me that I was perhaps hasty in my judgment. You were young, easily influenced." "Blackwell was a practiced confidence man who deceived many wiser than you." "How generous of you to acknowledge that," Delia said, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. Her father's expression hardened. "I'm offering you a chance to return home, Delia. To resume your rightful place in society. With Blackwell's arrest, the worst of the scandal will fade. You can put this unfortunate chapter behind you." Delia felt Ethan tense beside her, though his face remained impassive. "And what of the conditions of this offer?" she asked, knowing her father never gave anything without strings attached. "You would, of course, need to conduct yourself with proper decorum. No more associations that might reflect poorly on the family name." His meaningful glance at Ethan made his implication clear. "You mean I should abandon the people who showed me kindness when you cast me out?" Delia felt anger rising in her chest. "The people who judged me by my character rather than by gossip or financial advantage. I'm offering you your life back," William said stiffly. "A comfortable home, your position in society, financial security. What can these people give you compared to that?" Delia looked around at the ranch that had become her sanctuary, at Sarah's kind face, at the gardens she'd tended, at the simple cabin where she'd found independence. Then she looked at Ethan, whose steady presence had become her anchor in a storm-tossed world. "They've given me something far more valuable," she said quietly. "They've shown me what it means to earn respect rather than expect it, to build something with my own hands. To be valued for who I am, not for my father's name or money." William's face flushed with anger. "This is absurd. You would choose this life of servitude over your birthright, and for what? The company of ranch hands and a man with blood on his hands, father." Delia gasped, shocked by his cruelty. "Oh yes, I know all about McAllister's past," William continued coldly. "A killer who fled Texas one step ahead of a murder charge. Is this the sort of man you'd throw away your future for?" Ethan remained utterly still beside her, but she could feel the tension radiating from him. Before she could respond, Sarah stepped forward, her normally gentle face set in lines of steel. "Mr. Evans, you're standing on my property, insulting my foreman and upsetting my friend." I think it's time for you to leave." William looked stunned at being addressed so directly by a rancher's wife. "Mrs. Miller, surely you understand." "I understand perfectly," Sarah interrupted. "You abandoned your daughter when she needed you most, and now you want to reclaim her like a possession because it's convenient for you." She crossed her arms. "Delia has earned her place here through hard work and character. She doesn't need your conditional charity." For a moment, William seemed at a loss for words, then his face hardened. "Very well. If this is your choice, Delia, so be it, but don't come crawling back when you realize what you've given up." He turned to assist Mrs. Thornton back into the carriage. "I won't," Delia said quietly. "Goodbye, Father." They watched in silence as the carriage turned and rolled back down the drive. Only when it disappeared from view did Delia realize she was trembling. Ethan's arm went around her waist, supporting her. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. She nodded, unexpected tears stinging her eyes. "Yes, for the first time in a very long while, I think I am." That evening, after Sarah had tactfully retired early and the ranch hands had returned to the bunkhouse, Delia found herself alone with Ethan on the porch. The stars were emerging one by one in the darkening sky, and a cool breeze carried the scent of pine from the distant hills. "Did you ever regret it?" she asked. "Leaving Texas, starting over?" Ethan considered the question, his profile strong against the fading light. "I regretted not being able to save Emily. I regretted that her life ended in fear and pain." He turned to face her. "But coming here, finding a place where I could build something honest, no, I don't regret that, nor do I," she said softly. "When my father first cast me out, I thought my life was over. Everything I'd been raised to value, social position, wealth, respectability, was gone in an instant." She smiled, looking out at the ranch that had become her home. "I never imagined I'd find something so much more meaningful in its place." "And what have you found, Delia?" Ethan asked, his voice low. She met his gaze unflinchingly. "Strength I didn't know I had, work that matters, people who care about who I am, not what I represent." She hesitated, then added quietly, "And you?" The moment hung between them, fragile and precious. Then Ethan reached out, his calloused fingers gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. "When I first saw you in town that day, struggling with your trunk, I recognized something in you," he said. "A kind of brokenness that matched my own, but also a dignity that wouldn't be crushed by circumstance." "Is that why you helped me?" she asked. "Recognition," he shook his head slightly. "That was just the beginning. Since then, I've come to admire your courage, your willingness to learn, your kindness." His hand cupped her cheek. "I've come to care for you, Delia, more than I thought possible after Emily." Her heart quickened at his words, at the gentle touch of his hand. "I was so certain I'd never trust my heart again after Vernon," she whispered. "I was a fool once, loving the wrong man. And now—" His gray eyes searched hers, vulnerability and hope mingling in their depths. Instead of answering with words, Delia leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, but deepened as his arms went around her, drawing her close against his chest. When they finally parted, breathless, she saw in his face the same wonder she felt in her own heart. "You were cast out for loving the wrong man," he said softly. "Perhaps it's time to love the right one now." Delia smiled, tears of joy pricking her eyes. "I think I already do." In the weeks that followed, the ranch settled into its autumn rhythms. The cattle drive returned successful, with prices better than expected. Preparations for winter began in earnest, hay stored, wood chopped, preserves put up. Through it all, Delia and Ethan's relationship deepened. No longer a secret, but accepted with knowing smiles from Sarah and good-natured teasing from the ranch hands. Even Hank Owens grudgingly admitted he might have judged her too harshly. especially after she helped nurse his favorite horse through a dangerous colic. As October painted the aspen groves gold, news reached them that Vernon Blackwell had been convicted of fraud and sentenced to 10 years in prison. The ranch hands celebrated that evening, many of them having lost money to his schemes. "Does it bring you any peace?" Ethan asked Delia as they walked along the creek that evening, hand in hand. "Some," she admitted. "Not for myself, but for all the others he hurt, my father included." She had not heard from William Evans since his visit, but town gossip relayed by Jimmy on supply runs suggested he had not weathered the scandal as well as he pretended. The bank was struggling and many depositors had withdrawn their funds. "You ever miss it?" Ethan asked. "Your old life?" Delia considered the question honestly. "I miss certain comforts sometimes. Hot baths that I don't have to haul and heat the water for. Books, music." She squeezed his hand. "But those are things, not people or feelings. What I have now: purpose, respect, love. Those can't be bought at any price." Ethan stopped walking and turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. In the golden autumn light, his face was solemn yet filled with quiet joy. "Delia Evans, I never thought to find love again after Emily. I came west intending to be alone with my ghosts." His thumbs traced gentle circles on her wrists. "But you changed that. You showed me that the past doesn't have to define the future." Her heart swelled with emotion as she recognized the path this conversation was taking. "Ethan, let me finish," he said gently. "I'm not a wealthy man. I can't offer you the life you were born to, but I can promise to love you honestly and completely for all of my days." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple gold band. "Will you marry me?" Tears of joy sprang to her eyes. "Yes," she whispered. 1,000 times yes." When he slipped the ring onto her finger, it felt like the completion of a journey she hadn't even known she was on when she first stumbled off that stagecoach in Gold Ridge. "Where did you get this?" she asked, admiring the simple but beautiful band. "It was my mother's," he explained. "The one thing I kept when I left Texas. I've been carrying it, waiting for the right moment." Delia kissed him then, pouring all her love and hopes for their future into the embrace. When they parted, both breathless and smiling, she said, "We should tell Sarah and Robert. They'll be overjoyed." "They already know," Ethan admitted with a grin. "I asked Robert's blessing last week. Sarah's been planning the wedding feast since spring, I think." Laughing, they walked back to the ranch house hand in hand, the setting sun gilding the world around them with promise. They were married on a crisp November day, with the mountains wearing their first dusting of snow. The ceremony was held in the ranch house, with Sarah and Robert standing witness along with the ranch hands and a few neighbors. Reverend Johnson rode out from Gold Ridge to perform the service, bringing with him unexpected guests Mary Crawford and, to Delia's shock, Margaret Thornton. "Your father refused to come," Mrs. Thornton explained privately before the ceremony, her usually stern face softened with sympathy. "But he didn't forbid me. I thought someone from your old life should be here to wish you well." "Thank you," Delia said, genuinely touched. "It means more than I can say." The ceremony itself was simple but heartfelt. Delia wore a dress of deep blue that Sarah had helped her make, with wildflowers in her hair instead of a veil. When she and Ethan spoke their vows, the love shining in his eyes made her feel more beautiful than she ever had in the finest gowns of her previous life. "I promise to stand beside you through whatever life brings," he said, his voice steady and sure. "To build our future together day by day with honesty and love." "I promise to trust in what we've found together," she replied. "To cherish the second chance we've both been given, and to love you faithfully all the days of my life." When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, The cheer that went up from the assembled guests nearly raised the roof. The celebration that followed lasted well into the night, with music from Jimmy's fiddle, dancing in the cleared barn, and enough food to feed twice their number. As the evening drew to a close, Ethan led Delia to a surprise: the old foreman's cabin, transformed. The ranch hands had worked in secret to expand it, adding a proper bedroom and a small sitting room with bookshelves. Sarah had contributed curtains and quilts, while Robert's gift was a rocking chair for the porch. "Our home," Ethan said simply, watching her face as she took it all in. "It's perfect," she whispered, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness of the people who had become her family. That night, as they lay together in their new home, Delia rested her head on Ethan's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Did you ever imagine, when you saw me that day in town, that we would end up here?" His arms tightened around her. "No, but I'm grateful every day that I stopped to help a stubborn woman with a heavy trunk." She laughed softly. "And I'm grateful that a certain cowboy was thrown out of a saloon at precisely the right moment." He kissed the top of her head. "Sleep now, Mrs. McAllister. Tomorrow is the first day of our life together." Spring came early to the Rockingham Ranch in 1877. The pastures greened, calves were born, and the apple trees burst into fragrant bloom. Delia, now 5 months pregnant with their first child, worked in the garden she had expanded, singing softly to the new life growing within her. The ranch was thriving under Robert's leadership and Ethan's capable management. With the money from the previous year's cattle sales, they had purchased additional land and improved the breeding stock. Delia's careful accounting had identified new efficiencies that increased their profits substantially. Life had fallen into a rhythm that suited them: hard work balanced by quiet evenings together, the satisfaction of building something lasting, the deep joy of a love that had grown from mutual respect and understanding. One warm May afternoon, Delia looked up from her gardening to see a familiar carriage approaching. Her heart quickened as she recognized her father's buggy, though this time he drove alone. Wiping her hands on her apron, she rose carefully, one hand supporting her growing belly. Ethan, who had been mending a fence nearby, immediately came to her side. "You don't have to see him," he reminded her, echoing his words from nearly a year before. She squeezed his hand. "I know, but I want to." William Evans had aged in the months since she'd last seen him. His once imperious posture was slightly stooped, his face lined with care. He climbed down from the buggy slowly, his eyes taking in the changes to the ranch, then fixing on his daughter specifically, on the evidence of her condition. "Delia," he said, his voice holding none of the coldness of their last encounter, "you're looking well." "Thank you, Father, as are you." She didn't move to embrace him, but neither did she step back. "What brings you to the Rockingham?" William glanced at Ethan, who stood protectively at Delia's side. "I was hoping we might speak privately." "Anything you have to say to my wife can be said in front of me," Ethan said quietly but firmly. William nodded, accepting this. "Very well." He took a deep breath. "I've come to apologize, Delia, for my harshness, my pride, my failure as a father when you needed me most." The words, so unexpected, momentarily robbed her of speech. She had never in all her life heard William Evans admit to a failure. "What prompted this change of heart?" she asked finally. "Many things." He looked older suddenly, vulnerable in a way she had never seen. "The bank hasn't weathered recent difficulties well. We're closing at the end of the month." "I'm sorry to hear that," she said sincerely. He waved away her sympathy. "It's not the bank that matters. It's what losing it showed me: that everything I valued, everything I sacrificed for, could disappear in an instant." His eyes met hers directly. "Including my only child." "Father, please, let me finish. Margaret has been most insistent that I recognize my errors before it's too late. She reminded me that soon I will be a grandfather, and that continuing this estrangement would rob me of knowing my grandchild." He looked at her hopefully. "If you can find it in your heart to forgive an old man's pride, I would very much like to be part of your life again." Delia felt tears welling in her eyes. Beside her, Ethan's hand tightened on hers, supportive but leaving the decision entirely to her. "I forgive you, Father," she said softly. "I've learned something about pride myself these past months, and about second chances." Relief washed over William's face. "Thank you," he said simply. "Would you like to stay for dinner?" she offered. "Meet the Millers, see our home," he nodded, a tentative smile softening his austere features. "I would like that very much." As they walked toward the ranch house together, Delia felt a sense of completeness she hadn't realized was missing. The circle of her life was closing, healing old wounds even as new life grew within her. That night, after her father had departed with promises to return soon, and with an open invitation for Delia and Ethan to visit him and Margaret in their new home in town, Delia sat with her husband on the porch of their cabin, watching the stars emerge. "Are you happy with how things turned out with your father?" Ethan asked, his arm around her shoulders. Delia nodded, leaning into his embrace. "It feels right somehow, like the last piece falling into place." She placed his hand on her rounded belly where their child had just delivered a healthy kick. "Our baby will know all of his grandparents now." "His?" Ethan raised an eyebrow, amusement in his voice. "So certain it's a boy," she smiled mysteriously. "Call it a mother's intuition." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the ranch, the distant lowing of cattle, the soft whicker of horses in the barn, the chorus of spring peepers from the creek. "You know," Ethan said thoughtfully, "when I first came west, I was running from my past. I never expected to find a future. And I was clinging to a past that never really existed," Delia replied, "trying to be someone I thought I should be instead of discovering who I could become." Ethan turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. In the silver moonlight, his face was etched with love and a wonder that still hadn't faded. "Do you ever regret it, being cast out, having to rebuild your entire life?" Delia considered the question seriously. "How can I regret the path that led me to you, to this?" She gestured to encompass their home, the ranch, the life they'd built together. "Sometimes the wrong turn is actually the right one. You just can't see it until you've traveled far enough down the road." Ethan leaned forward and kissed her tenderly. "Then I'm grateful for every twist and turn that brought us here." As they sat together under the vast canopy of stars, Delia Evans McAllister, once the pampered daughter of a banker, now a rancher's wife, soon to be a mother, felt a contentment deeper than anything she had known in her old life. She had been cast out for loving the wrong man, but in that exile had found the right one, and with him, a love that was built to last through whatever life might bring. 3 months later, on a hot August morning, Delia gave birth to a healthy son they named James Robert McAllister. As she cradled her newborn with Ethan's arms around them both, she knew with absolute certainty that every hardship, every tear, every moment of doubt had been worth it for this perfect happiness. And in the years that followed, as the rocking M prospered, as their family grew to include a daughter 2 years later, as Gold Ridge expanded with the railroad's influence, Delia often thought back to that moment of despair when she first returned to town, disgraced and alone. How little she had known then that losing everything she thought she wanted would lead her to everything she truly needed. The wrong man had broken her heart, but the right one had helped her find herself. And in that discovery lay a love story more beautiful than any she could have imagined.